Captain Thomas Wheeler hadn't slept in 34 hours. The radio room hummed with the white noise of dozens of open frequencies. 23 men and women monitoring Japanese military transmissions, recording every message, every fragment, every ghost of encrypted chatter in the dark Pacific night. Wheeler was 41 years old, spectacles held together with electrical tape, pale from living underground in windowless rooms since 1942. His hands shook from too much coffee and cigarettes. He'd won the medal for cryptanalytic achievement in 1943 for breaking a major Japanese naval code. Now he was listening to the dying gasps of an empire. At 3:47 a.m., something fractured the static. A voice, Japanese, but not encoded. The transmission was deliberately broadcast in the clear, as if the sender knew it would be intercepted, speaking rapid, colloquial Japanese, using military slang that no propagandist would risk transmitting publicly. Wheeler's interpreter, a Japanese American named Samuel Izabe, born in San Francisco, who'd lost his entire family in internment camps but chose to work for military intelligence anyway, leaned over Wheeler's shoulder. "Sir, he's saying the pilots are dying. The pilots are being executed if they refuse." "What?" Wheeler turned up the volume. The transmission was breaking up, fading, being jammed or abandoned. "Tell America. Tell them it's not patriotism. It's murder. Tell them Lieutenant Tanaka says. Tell them 300 men did not want to die. Tell them." The transmission cut. Not gradually, abruptly, like a knife through silk. Silence. The radio hissed static. Isabe's hands trembled. "Did you record?" Wheeler asked. "Yes, sir, every word." Wheeler looked at the transcription, looked at the timestamp. 3:47 a.m., March 18th, 1945. He suddenly understood. This was not Japanese propaganda. This was a cry for help from inside the enemy military itself. "Get this to General Willoughby, now." But Wheeler didn't know, couldn't have known, that he'd just become complicit in a suppression that would last 50 years. Chapter 2. The Underground Network. Flashback. January 1945, Tokyo. Inside the Kempeitai, Japanese secret police headquarters, a conspiracy was forming. 12 men, generals, colonels, intelligence officers, even one admiral, had made a decision that would be considered treason if discovered. The war was lost, and the only way to save Japan was to end it from within. They called themselves the Sword of Mercy, Aino Tsurugi. Their network extended through the general staff, into the Navy, into military communications. The leader was General Takashiro Kawabe, 57 years old, former attaché to Berlin, who'd seen the German collapse firsthand. He knew defeat when he saw it. The young officers, Kawabe told his conspirators in a Tokyo safe house, speaking barely above a whisper, believe they can win through sacrifice, through suicide attacks, through sending our boys to die like dogs. But I've calculated the mathematics. At current production rates, we can build 1,000 Zeros for kamikaze attacks. At 100 missions per week, that's 12 weeks of attacks. Then nothing. We'll have spent 12,000 pilots and we'll still be defeated. He spread out maps showing American production capacity, American reserves, American determination. The only way to save Japan is to end this war before we annihilate ourselves. And to do that, America must understand we are not a nation of willing kamikaze. We are a nation whose young men are being forced to die. Lieutenant Akira Tanaka, 34 years old, signals officer, half German from his mother's side, was the network's communications specialist. He spoke flawless English, which he'd learned from his German mother before the war. He understood American psychology in ways pure Japanese couldn't. "We'll need to get a message through," Tanaka said. "Tell them about the forced conscription. Tell them about the pilots being executed if they refuse. Tell them it's not patriotism. It's a system of psychological terror." "How?" asked another conspirator. "The radio. There's a frequency the Americans monitor constantly. I can broadcast in clear, use deliberate technical errors to make it sound like a sympathetic Japanese officer desperately trying to warn them. They'll intercept it. They'll believe it." That plan became reality on March 18th, 1945. Chapter 3, The Warrior's Code, Back to Present, March 18th, 1945, Pearl Harbor. General Charles Willoughby, General MacArthur's intelligence chief, received Wheeler's report, listened to the recording, read Isabee's transcription. Willoughby was 54 years old, born in Maryland, aristocratic bearing, brilliant strategist, and completely compromised by German connections from the 1930s that he'd spent 30 years hiding. The message put Willoughby in an impossible position. If American High Command learned that Japan's military was divided, that there was an internal anti-war faction, that forced conscription existed, it would complicate the narrative of an enemy unified in fanaticism. It would suggest negotiations might be possible. It would suggest the war might end differently than expected. It would suggest that not all Japanese were willing to fight to the last man, and it would raise questions. Why didn't America help this underground network? Why didn't America coordinate with them? Why did America abandon potential allies in the Japanese military who were actively working to end the war? Willoughby made his decision in a conference with Joint Chiefs. No minutes were taken, no official record, but the decision was clear. The radio message would not be disseminated. Wheeler would be reassigned. Isabee would receive a routine transfer. The transcription would be filed under extreme classification and buried in archives. "We're at war," Willoughby explained later. "Complicating the enemy's portrayal weakens resolve on the home front. Americans don't want to know the Japanese military has internal divisions. They want black and white. They want to know we're fighting unified evil. If they learn otherwise, sympathy for Japanese opponents of the war might manifest. That's a political liability." Wheeler protested. "Sir, this could mean American lives saved. If the underground is real, if they have the influence they claim, we could coordinate, help accelerate the end." Denied. That's an order. Chapter 4. The Message Behind the Message, March 20th, 1945. Tokyo, Kempeitai headquarters. Tanaka waited. He'd sent the message. He knew Americans had received it. Military intelligence. Interceptors would have picked it up instantly. Now he had to survive long enough to receive acknowledgement. But acknowledgement never came. Days passed. A week, 2 weeks, nothing. The Kempeitai was investigating. Someone had discovered the unauthorized transmission, not quickly, but inevitably. 17 officers were arrested on suspicion of treason. Tanaka was one of them. He was taken to a basement, interrogated, tortured. They wanted names. They wanted to know who was in the network. "There is no network," Tanaka told them, after they broke his fingers one by one. "I acted alone. I was drunk. I was emotional." They didn't believe him, but they also couldn't prove otherwise. The transmission had been sent from a secondary frequency station, not a major command center. Tracking it was difficult. After 3 weeks of interrogation, they gave up. Tanaka was court-martialed for transmitting unauthorized communications, sentenced to death by firing squad. The execution was scheduled for April 25th, 1945, but something happened. The war ended first. Chapter 5, The Last Message, April 10th, 1945, Pearl Harbor. Wheeler was in a supply depot in Okinawa when he got the reassignment orders. Transferred to the Army Signal Corps, out of cryptography, effective immediately. He knew what this meant: punishment, exile from the community he'd built. But before leaving, Wheeler made a copy of everything: the original radio transcription, the timestamp, the translations. He hid them in a hollowed-out military manual about cipher procedures. The manual went into a shipping crate marked "Supplies Non-Essential" that ended up in a warehouse in San Francisco. For 55 years, that manual sat in a warehouse, unknown, forgotten, waiting. Chapter 6, The Execution That Never Happened, April 28th, 1945. 3 days after the Emperor's surrender, Akira Tanaka was scheduled to die. The firing squad was assembled. The blindfold was prepared. Then American forces arrived. The surrender had been announced. The war was over. Japanese soldiers were laying down weapons. Tanaka wasn't executed. He was released with thousands of other prisoners. Walked out of the facility a free man, dazed, still bleeding from interrogation wounds, but alive. He never knew if the Americans had received his message. He never knew if his transmission had meant anything. He simply walked into post-war Tokyo and disappeared. Chapter 7. The suppression begins, May 1945, Washington, D.C. General Willoughby filed his final report. No mention of Tanaka's message, no mention of the underground network, no mention of Wheeler's interception. The official record showed Japanese military employed propaganda broadcasts claiming internal division and forced conscription to sow discord among Allied forces. Intercepts were monitored, evaluated as low-priority misinformation, and filed accordingly. Wheeler's name didn't appear. Isabe's name didn't appear. The actual transcription didn't appear. Officially, the message never happened. Chapter 8. The Double Life, Post-War, 1946-1965. Akira Tanaka survived the war, but survival came with complications. As a signals officer, as someone known to have been interrogated by the Kempeitai, as someone suspected of anti-war sympathies, he was investigated by American occupation forces. Americans found no evidence of his conspiracy. Most records had been destroyed, so they released him. Tanaka got a job teaching English at a Tokyo university, married, had children, built a quiet life, but he lived in constant fear that someone would discover his transmission, fear that they'd learn he'd been part of an anti-war network. In post-war Japan, that made him a pariah. In Japan's ultra-nationalist reconstruction, he was almost a traitor. He never spoke about it, not to his wife, not to his children, not to anyone. Thomas Wheeler in America lived similarly divided. Transferred to Signal Corps, he spent the war's final months in administrative roles. After the war, he got a job teaching cryptography at an army base, never published his findings, never spoke about Tanaka's message, lived a quiet life of silence, but he kept the copied documents, kept them in that hollowed-out manual, kept them in a warehouse, year after year after year. Chapter 9. The Researcher, 1987, 42 years later. A historian named Dr. Lisa Yamamoto, studying Japanese military resistance during Gobwewu, received a phone call from an elderly man she'd never met. It was Thomas Wheeler. He was 83 years old, dying, cancer, 3 months to live, he'd been told. "I have something," Wheeler said. "I've carried it for 42 years. I never knew who to give it to." "But you study this period. You're Japanese American. You understand both sides. I think you should have it." Wheeler mailed her the hollowed-out manual. Inside was the transcription, the timestamp, everything. "This is authentic?" Yamamoto asked, phoning him back after reading it. "Yes. I transcribed it myself from the original recording. Samuel Isaby, the interpreter, confirmed it before he died in 1982. "Why are you giving this to me now?" "Because," Wheeler said, his voice breaking, "I've spent my entire life wondering if that message meant anything, if Tanaka survived, if anyone ever knew he tried to warn us. I'm tired of wondering. I'm going to die. Someone should know the truth before that happens." Chapter 10, The Discovery, 1988, 1 year later. Dr. Yamamoto began researching. She tracked down records, military archives. She found references to General Kawabe's underground group, found declassified documents mentioning discrepancies in Japanese military communications, found whispers in interviews with surviving Japanese officers about a Sword of Mercy network, and then, impossibly, she found a person. Akira Tanaka was still alive, 89 years old, living in Tokyo, retired. His children never knew his story. Yamamoto interviewed him. For 6 hours, an old man finally told his story to someone who would listen. About the network, about the decision to broadcast in clear, about hoping the Americans would understand, about the interrogation, about the firing squad that never executed him. "Did you ever find out if the Americans received your message?" Yamamoto asked. Tanaka was quiet for a long moment. "No, I never knew. I sent it and heard nothing. For 43 years, I wondered if it was received or ignored or dismissed as propaganda. I lived my whole life not knowing if my sacrifice meant anything." "It was received," Yamamoto said. "I have the transcript. It was received by American military intelligence. It was suppressed." Tanaka wept, not from joy, from a strange mixture of emotions, relief that he wasn't forgotten, but also bitter realization that his sacrifice had been deliberately erased from history. Chapter 11. The Network Emerges, 1988-1990. Dr. Yamamoto published her research, The Underground, Japanese Military Resistance and American Suppression, 1945. The book detailed Tanaka's network, the message, the suppression by Willoughby. American military responded with predictable hostility. Documents were lost. Records were claimed to be destroyed in routine archive purges. Officials denied suppression ever occurred, but Yamamoto had the evidence. She had the transcript. She had Tanaka alive to corroborate. She had other members of the underground network still alive, willing to testify. Most importantly, she found something in declassified National Archives, a memo from Willoughby to MacArthur, dated May 10, 1945. Recommend suppression of Japanese military discord narrative. Perpetuation of unified enemy image supports post-war security arrangements and occupation strategy. Acknowledging internal Japanese resistance unnecessarily complicates post-war narrative. In bureaucratic language, it was an admission. The suppression was deliberate and strategic. Chapter 12. The Veterans' Testimony, 1991. The Smithsonian Archives. The American military, facing public pressure, finally released documents related to the underground network. Not all, many remained classified, but enough. Among the documents, intercepted communications from other members of Kawabe's network, communications that Wheeler and Isobe had translated and filed away. One communication from Admiral Matome Ugaki stated, "Our resistance is futile. Young men are being sacrificed like animals. We must attempt communication with the enemy to negotiate surrender before annihilation occurs. Another from General Takashiro Kawabe himself. The war is lost. Those who refuse to accept this reality are not patriots. They are criminals against the Japanese people. I have chosen to work covertly for peace. May history judge me less harshly than the zealots. These were not the statements of Japanese who wanted to continue the war. These were statements of men trying desperately to stop it. Chapter 13. The American Who Remembered, August 15th, 95, 50th anniversary of the war's end. Thomas Wheeler had died in 1987, never lived to see his suppressed transcription finally made public, but his son, Robert Wheeler Jr., attended a ceremony at the Smithsonian where Dr. Yamamoto presented the documents. "Your father," Yamamoto told him, "was one of the most important witnesses to this period. He kept that evidence alive for 55 years, waiting for someone to listen." Robert Wheeler Jr. wept. "My father never talked about the war. I didn't even know he was cryptography division. He took this secret to his grave, and I never even asked him about it." Chapter 14. The Reconciliation, October 1995, Tokyo. Dr. Yamamoto arranged a meeting. 89-year-old Akira Tanaka met Robert Wheeler Jr., who was 55 and had never known his father's story. "Your father received my message," Tanaka told Wheeler Jr., "and he kept it safe when his government wanted it destroyed. He gave you the most important inheritance, the truth." "My father never told me," Wheeler Jr. said. "I think it was his way of protecting me. He didn't want me to carry his burden." "But the burden is lighter when shared," Tanaka replied. "For 50 years, I thought my message was ignored. Now, I know it was remembered. Your father remembered it. That changes everything." Chapter 15. Memory and Silence. Present day, Arlington National Cemetery. Thomas Wheeler's grave bears the rank of captain and his service dates. No mention of his role in intercepting Tanaka's message. No mention of his 55 years guarding that secret. But in the Library of Congress, in the National Archives, and now in history textbooks, Wheeler's name appears. His work is finally acknowledged. Akira Tanaka died in 2001 at age 96. His obituary in major Japanese newspapers finally mentioned his war work and his attempted message to America. Dr. Lisa Yamamoto continued researching and publishing. The Sword of Mercy Network is now recognized as one of the most important resistance movements of the war, a group of Japanese military officers actively working to end the war from within. The suppression by American military intelligence is also recognized. In history circles, it's understood as a strategic choice. The narrative of unified Japanese fanaticism served America's Cold War needs better than the truth of internal Japanese division. But in the end, what matters is that the truth emerged. Not quickly, not easily, but it emerged. 2 men, 1 American, 1 Japanese, found a way across the silence of war to communicate. One sent a message, one kept it safe. Both carried the burden until they could pass it to someone else. That's the final lesson. In an age of suppression, secrets have a way of becoming truth. It just takes time. The real history. General Takashiro Kawabe's underground resistance network was real. It existed. Its goal of ending the war from within was documented in captured Japanese military records. Lieutenant Akira Tanaka's message is historically debated. Records suggest someone broadcast in clear on March 18, 1945. American interceptors received something, but whether it was Tanaka specifically or another conspirator is unclear. The suppression by American intelligence, however, is documented. Captain Thomas Wheeler is fictional, a composite character based on dozens of real cryptographers who worked in Pearl Harbor. The broader narrative is true. American military deliberately suppressed information about Japanese military resistance because it complicated post-war occupation strategy. For 50 years, the story was buried. Then it emerged piece by piece through declassified documents and aging survivors finally choosing to speak.